You open your eyes in the morning, and there's this strange heaviness sitting on your chest before your feet even touch the floor. You've done everything you were told would make life feel complete. The career, the routine, the relationships that look good from the outside. You've checked every single box on a list you didn't even write. But something inside you feels hollow, like a house with all the furniture in place, but no one actually living in it. Maybe you catch yourself staring out of a window in the middle of the day, and for a split second you wonder, when was the last time I actually felt like myself? Or maybe the truth is even more unsettling. Maybe you're not sure you ever really knew who that self was in the first place. You've been walking someone else's path, breathing someone else's air, performing a role that was handed to you so long ago that the costume now feels like your own skin. If something in those words just tightened in your chest, stay with me. Because you are far from the only person carrying this feeling. Right now, millions of people across the world are moving through their days on autopilot, smiling when the moment calls for it, saying the right things at the right time, and then lying awake at 3 a.m, wondering why everything feels like a performance. They've been shaped, molded, and rewired by outside forces for so many years that the original version of who they are got buried somewhere along the way. Underneath all the expectations, the old pain, and the endless pressure to be something acceptable. But here's what I need you to really hear. You didn't lose yourself. That's the lie. The truth is, you were never actually gone. You just got buried. Year after year, layer after layer. Other people's demands, society's rulebook, survival habits that made sense once but stopped serving you a long time ago. All of it piled on top of who you really are. But underneath all that weight, the real you is still there, still breathing, still waiting for the moment you decide to start digging. This isn't some fluffy conversation about finding your passion or chasing a dream. This goes deeper than that. This is about reclaiming the person you were before the world told you who to be. Taking back ownership of your own mind, your own choices, your own life. And by the time you reach the end of this, you'll have a clear path to peel away everything that was never really you and come back home to the person you've always been underneath it all. Chapter 1. The Silent Takeover. How you were programmed to forget who you are. Most people believe they lost themselves slowly. A compromise here, a safe decision there, a dream quietly shelved in the back of a closet. But the reality is far more uncomfortable than that. You didn't drift away from yourself. You were trained, carefully, consistently, from your very first breath, to abandon who you were. This wasn't some dark conspiracy. It's simply the way the machine of society operates. But the outcome is identical either way. You became a stranger living inside your own body. Think about your earliest memories. Before you even understood the world, you were already being taught the rules. Certain behaviors earned you warmth, attention, approval. Other behaviors earned you cold shoulders, raised voices, the withdrawal of love. You learned the equation fast because children are brilliant at survival. Love had conditions. Acceptance had a price tag. Simply being who you naturally were wasn't enough. You had to be obedient. You had to be impressive. You had to shrink yourself into a shape that made other people comfortable. And piece by piece, your real self got pushed underground. Your mother or father, probably with nothing but love in their hearts, taught you to silence the parts of yourself that made them uneasy. Your teachers celebrated the kids who colored inside the lines and sidelined the ones who didn't. Your classmates showed you, sometimes brutally, that being different was an invitation for cruelty. Every system you moved through had its own set of invisible instructions about who you should become, what you should care about, and what you should never, ever want. But here's the part that changes everything once you see it. You didn't just follow those instructions on the outside. You swallowed them whole. You absorbed them so deeply that you couldn't tell the difference between their voice and yours anymore. Their expectations became your desires. Their fears became your boundaries. You built an entire internal surveillance system to keep yourself in line. And over time, you forgot it was even running. The cage became invisible because you became both the one locked inside and the one holding the key. Your deeper mind, the part of you that operates beneath your awareness, made a calculation early on. It decided that being authentic was a threat, that showing the real you meant risking everything. Rejection, abandonment, being cast out. So it built an elaborate set of defenses. It created anxiety around visibility. It made you hesitate before speaking your truth. It convinced you at the deepest level that who you actually are isn't worthy of love, isn't smart enough, isn't safe to reveal. And the heartbreaking part? Most people go their entire lives without ever realizing any of this happened. They spend decades trying to improve a version of themselves that was never real in the first place. They chase promotions, accumulate relationships, collect achievements, and wonder why the hunger never goes away. They keep looking for themselves in all the external places, in titles, in other people's eyes, in the next accomplishment, never realizing that they're searching with the wrong identity entirely. What psychologists describe as the false self is this carefully assembled character you've been performing for years. It's the version of you that knows exactly what to do, say at dinner parties, what face to wear in the office, what version of yourself each situation requires. And it became so seamless, so automatic, that at some point you forgot it was an act. You started believing your own performance. This false self is remarkably intelligent. It shape-shifts. In the workplace, you become the competent professional who never cracks. Around your family, you become the dependable one, the peacekeeper, the child they always wanted. With your friends, you become the entertainer, the listener, the one who holds it all together. With romantic partners, you morph into whoever you think they need you to be. And in all that constant adapting and performing, the actual you, the one underneath all the masks, gets quieter and quieter until you can barely hear it at all. This is why so many people feel like they're living fragmented lives. why they feel like imposters wearing someone else's face. They're not broken. They're not defective. They've simply been trained to put everyone else's truth above their own for so long that they've forgotten they have a truth at all. So the first real step toward coming back to yourself isn't searching for who you are. It's getting honest about who you're not. It's having the courage to look at all the beliefs, preferences, habits, and fears that you've always assumed were yours and asking the uncomfortable question, how much of this was actually my choice? Because once you start pulling at that thread, you'll discover that most of what you thought defined you was installed by someone else. And that realization, as disorienting as it feels, is the beginning of freedom. Chapter 2. The Invisible Maze. Understanding the hidden forces that keep you stuck. Your subconscious mind is steering the ship, and the unsettling truth is that most of the time you don't even know it's at the wheel. While you're up top making what feels like conscious, deliberate choices about your life, there's an entire operating system running beneath the surface, programmed years ago when you were just a small human trying to survive emotionally in a world that felt enormous and unpredictable. Understanding how this hidden system works isn't optional, it's essential, because you cannot escape a maze you don't know you're walking through. Here's what makes this so powerful. Your subconscious mind processes roughly 11 million pieces of information every single second. Your conscious mind? About 40. That means the overwhelming majority of what you experience, interpret, and respond to is being handled by systems you have zero awareness of. Your subconscious is constantly running in the background, scanning for danger, making predictions about what's safe and what isn't, and nudging your behavior before you even realize you've been nudged. The problem is that this system was built when you were young, when being liked wasn't a preference, it was a survival strategy. For a small child, losing the love of the people who feed you, shelter you, protect you, is genuinely life-threatening. So your developing mind created incredibly sophisticated programs to make sure you stayed lovable, stayed acceptable, stayed safe. And those programs were brilliant. They worked. They kept you alive. But that was decades ago, and those same protective patterns that saved you when you were 5 are now the very things sabotaging your ability to be real. Your subconscious still operates as if expressing your genuine self will lead to catastrophe. It still treats authenticity like a fire alarm. That's why your stomach tightens when you think about saying what you really feel. That's why you rehearse conversations in your head before having them. That's why blending in feels so much safer than standing out. Your deeper mind has classified being real as a survival threat, and it will fight to keep you from taking that risk. And here's what makes it even harder to break free. Your subconscious doesn't speak in logic. It speaks in feelings. You can't sit down and have a rational conversation with it. You can't explain that you're an adult now, that rejection won't destroy you, that it's safe to come out of hiding. It doesn't work that way. This system runs on patterns that were burned into your wiring through years of repetition and emotional intensity. Every time you were punished for being yourself, every time you were shamed for speaking up, every time someone made you feel like you were too much or not enough, Your subconscious filed it away as proof that being real is dangerous. One of the sneakiest tools your subconscious uses is something psychologists call cognitive dissonance. That grinding discomfort you feel when who you really are clashes with who you believe you should be. Most people resolve that tension by changing their view of who they really are, rather than questioning who they think they should be. They convince themselves they actually want the life they think they're supposed to want. They gaslight themselves into alignment with a script that was never theirs. Your subconscious also runs what's known as the reticular activating system, essentially a filter that shapes your reality to match your existing beliefs. If somewhere deep down you believe you don't deserve genuine connection, your brain will spotlight every rejection while completely ignoring every moment of acceptance. If you believe that being yourself leads to pain, you'll notice every negative reaction while overlooking all the times people responded to your realness with warmth. This creates a loop that feeds itself. Your hidden beliefs shape your behavior. Your behavior generates experiences that confirm those beliefs, and those confirmed beliefs strengthen the behavior, round and round. You end up trapped inside a reality that feels like objective truth, but is actually just an old program running on repeat. But here's where it gets hopeful. Understanding this mechanism means understanding that none of this is permanent. Your current experience of yourself, your sense of what's possible, the story you've been telling yourself about who you are and what you deserve, none of it is written in stone. It's all software, and software can be updated. The key realization is this: your subconscious is enormously powerful, but it's also remarkably simple. It can't tell the difference between then and now, between a real threat and a remembered one, between the helpless child you were and the capable adult you've become. It's still running the same emergency protocol from 20 or 30 years ago, convinced that your survival depends on other people's approval. But you're not that child anymore. You have options, resources, and strength that your old programming hasn't caught up to yet. Chapter 3. The Fortress You Built. Recognizing the performance you forgot you were giving. You've been acting for so long that you've forgotten the cameras are rolling. The version of you that walks through the world every day isn't a simple mask you put on and take off. It's an entire fortress, a complex, layered structure of behaviors, beliefs, and identities that feels as real as your own heartbeat. Because you've been constructing it, brick by brick, since childhood. And you can't dismantle something you don't even realize you've built. This fortress has different wings, each one designed for a different audience. There's the professional wing, the version of you that knows the right tone for every email, never shows cracks, always radiates control and competence. There's the social wing, the one that laughs at jokes that aren't funny, pretends to enjoy gatherings that drain you, performs enthusiasm you don't feel. There's the family wing, the role you were assigned before you were old enough to object. The responsible one, the quiet one, the one who keeps everyone happy. Each of these versions has its own voice, its own posture, its own value system. They're all impressively convincing, so convincing that even you believe them. You've been method acting your way through life for so long that you've genuinely forgotten these are characters. The fortress is guarded by an internal critic so vigilant it never sleeps. This critic monitors every word, every gesture, every impulse, making sure nothing authentic slips through the walls. It knows what every room requires and adjusts your performance in real time without you even noticing. But here's the part that really cuts deep. This isn't just about how you behave, it's about what you believe. You've internalized these characters so completely that you've lost contact with the actor underneath. You believe your own show. And this is exactly why so many outwardly successful people feel a quiet emptiness they can never explain. They've won every prize their fortress was designed to chase, but none of it reaches the person locked inside. The applause belongs to the character, not to them. The fortress is also brutally expensive to maintain. It demands constant energy, monitoring, adjusting, calculating, suppressing. You're always scanning how you're being perceived. Always. Running the math on which response will get the best reaction. Always pushing down the impulses that don't match the character you're playing. Most people don't realize how exhausting this is until they experience, even for a brief moment, what it feels like to drop the whole performance. That sudden rush of relief. That feeling of finally being able to breathe with your full lungs. That's the real you, breaking through the walls. Here's what makes this complicated. The fortress wasn't built out of weakness or cowardice. It was built out of love, self-love, survival love. It was the best strategy a small, scared version of you could come up with in a world that punished realness. It's not your enemy, it was your protector. But the same walls that once kept you safe are now keeping you trapped. The thing that saved your life is now preventing you from actually living it. Recognizing the fortress isn't about shame. It's about seeing clearly for the first time. It's about understanding that you've been living inside a construction, a beautiful, elaborate, exhausting construction, and that underneath it, there's someone far more alive, far more powerful, and far more real than you've been allowed to imagine. Chapter 4. The Dig. Uncovering who you were before the world got to you. Finding your real self isn't about inventing someone new. It's about recovering someone who's been there all along. Think of it like a garden that's been buried under years of concrete and debris. The flowers didn't die. They just stopped getting sunlight. The excavation process takes patience, gentleness, and the willingness to get your hands dirty in some uncomfortable soil. But what's waiting underneath is worth every moment of discomfort. The first layer you'll hit is the layer of borrowed voices. This one sits right at the surface because it's the most recent. The daily accumulation of other people's judgments, opinions, and expectations that constantly shape the way you see yourself. You've absorbed thousands of voices over the years, all telling you who to be, what to chase, how to live. And these voices have become so familiar, so woven into your internal dialogue, that they genuinely sound like your own thoughts. But they're not. They're echoes, phantom parents, invisible critics, an imaginary audience that's always watching and grading your performance. To dig through this layer, you need to start catching the difference between your voice and theirs. Pay attention to the language of your inner world. When you hear yourself say, "I should," stop and ask, whose expectation is that really? When shame rises in your body, get curious. Who taught me that this thing was something to be ashamed of? When guilt creeps in about wanting something, pause. Who told me that wanting this was selfish or wrong? This process is disorienting. You'll start to realize that beliefs you treated as sacred truths were actually just borrowed opinions from people who may not have even understood you. You'll discover fears that don't come from anything you actually experienced, but from stories you were handed about how the world works. It's like cleaning out a closet you haven't opened in years and realizing that most of what's in there doesn't even belong to you. Beneath the borrowed voices is the layer of survival patterns. These are the automatic behaviors you developed to navigate difficult situations, to dodge pain, to get your needs met when asking directly felt too dangerous, to stay safe in environments that didn't feel safe at all. Some of these strategies were genuinely brilliant at the time, but most of them have long outlived their purpose and are now running on autopilot, responding to threats that disappeared years ago. Maybe you learned that being invisible was the safest option. So you built a life around never speaking up, never drawing attention, never taking up too much space. Maybe you learned that love was a reward for performance. So you developed an engine of relentless achievement, always pushing, never pausing, never letting yourself feel satisfied. Maybe you learned that emotions were landmines. So you built walls around your heart so thick that you stopped feeling much of anything at all. These patterns are tricky because they feel like personality. You might genuinely believe, "I'm just someone who doesn't like attention," or "I'm just wired to be driven," or "I'm just not very emotional." But these aren't personality traits. They're survival costumes that a younger version of you put on during a storm, and you never took them off because you forgot you were wearing them. To move through this layer, you have to start questioning your automatic responses. The next time you catch yourself defaulting to a familiar pattern, pause and ask, is this actually the right response for what's happening right now? Or am I reacting to something that already ended? You'll be surprised how often you discover that you're still bracing for impacts that happened a long time ago, still defending against enemies who left the battlefield years before. Beneath the survival patterns is the deepest layer, the core wounds. These are the original moments that taught you it wasn't safe to be yourself. The experiences that proved to your young mind that love had conditions, that the world could turn on you without warning, that being who you naturally are would get you hurt. These wounds are the foundation on which your entire false self was constructed. They're the reason the fortress exists. This layer is the hardest to reach because it holds real pain. You'll find the moment when someone made you feel that your natural enthusiasm was too much. The day you learned that your sensitivity was a burden to the people around you. The experience that showed you that your unique way of seeing things was considered strange or wrong. You'll find the exact points in your history where you made the unconscious decision to hide, to shrink, to reshape yourself into something smaller and safer. And here's the difficult truth. You have to actually feel these old wounds to move through them. You have to let yourself experience the pain your fortress was designed to protect you from. This doesn't mean living in the past or building a monument to your suffering. It means having the bravery to feel what you've been running from, so you can finally walk through it, instead of spending the rest of your life walking around it. As you move through these layers, something beautiful starts to happen. You begin catching glimpses of who you were before all the construction began. You remember flashes of yourself being completely, unapologetically real. Moments when you didn't need permission to exist. You reconnect with wants that weren't influenced by anyone's agenda. Preferences that weren't filtered through what's acceptable. Dreams that weren't trimmed down to fit what seemed practical or realistic. This is your authentic self surfacing. It's not someone you need to create from scratch. It's someone you need to remember. It's the version of you that existed before fear taught you to hide, before love became transactional, before being different became something to apologize for. Chapter 5. Rewiring the Machine. How your brain can be rebuilt for a real life. Your brain is not a finished product, and that might be the single most transformative thing you absorb from everything we're exploring together. For a very long time, the scientific world believed that once your brain was formed, that was it. The wiring was permanent, the patterns were locked in, and who you became as a child was who you'd be for the rest of your life. But that belief has been completely overturned by modern research into neuroplasticity, your brain's remarkable ability to reorganize, rebuild, and reshape itself at any point in your life. And that means no matter how deeply your false self patterns are carved into your wiring, you can literally reconstruct your brain to support a more authentic way of living. Every single thought you think, every emotion you experience, every action you take is carving pathways in your brain. These pathways work like rivers. The more water flows down a particular channel, the deeper and wider that channel becomes, and the more naturally water flows there. If you've spent years running the thought, "I'm not enough," there's a deep, well-worn river in your brain dedicated to that belief. If you've spent years scanning every room for signs of disapproval, there's an entire network wired to do that automatically before you've even registered what's happening. But here's what changes everything. You can carve new rivers. Every time you choose a different thought, every time you respond differently than your programming expects, every time you act from your genuine self instead of your protective character, you're cutting a new channel in your brain. At first, this new channel is just a trickle, a narrow stream easily overwhelmed by the deep rivers of your old habits. But with repetition and intention, that trickle becomes a stream, and the stream becomes a current, and eventually the new channel becomes the primary flow. This is exactly why transformation feels so brutal in the beginning. Your old rivers have decades of momentum behind them. They're automatic. They feel like just who you are, because they've been your default for so long. When you try to think or behave differently, your brain has to work significantly harder because you're literally cutting through new ground. That's why your false self fights back when you start changing. That's why it floods you with fear, doubt, and discomfort when you step outside the familiar. It's not because you're doing something wrong. It's because you're doing something your brain hasn't done before. And this understanding is crucial. The discomfort you feel when you start choosing authenticity is not a danger signal. It's a construction signal. Your brain is literally being rewired. And just like any renovation, there's going to be noise, dust, and temporary chaos before the new structure is complete. The secret to effective neuroplastic change is repetition paired with emotional engagement. Your brain prioritizes experiences that carry emotional weight. So the more you can connect authentic moments with genuine positive feeling, relief, aliveness, pride, freedom, the faster those new pathways strengthen. This is why it matters to notice your wins, even the tiny ones. The moment you said what you actually thought instead of what felt safe. The moment you chose your own need over someone else's expectation. The moment you felt that brief exhale of being genuinely yourself. Each of those moments is physically rewiring your brain. Visualization is another remarkably powerful tool in this process. When you mentally rehearse living as your real self, your brain activates many of the same neural patterns as if you were actually doing it. Athletes have used this decades to sharpen their performance. You can use the same principle to strengthen your authentic self. Spend time each day seeing yourself clearly, expressing your honest opinions without backpedaling, making choices rooted in your own values, pursuing things that genuinely light you up rather than things that look impressive from the outside. The more vivid and emotionally rich these mental rehearsals are, the more you're reinforcing the neural architecture that supports authentic living. Your environment also plays a massive role in how your brain rewires. Your mind is constantly absorbing patterns from the people and situations around you. If you're surrounded by people who punish honesty, who reward performance, who make you feel unsafe for being real, your brain will keep strengthening the old rivers of hiding and pretending. But if you can find spaces where authenticity is welcomed, where being yourself is met with warmth instead of judgment, your brain will begin laying down different wiring entirely. This might mean adjusting your social world, finding new communities, or even just changing the content you consume to reflect the kind of life you actually want to live. The rewiring process isn't a straight line. Some days will feel like breakthroughs. Other days will feel like you've slid all the way back to the beginning. This is completely normal. Your brain is undergoing renovation, and renovations always have messy days. The point isn't perfection. The point is persistence. And here's what makes it exciting. This process accelerates. The more you practice being real, the easier it gets. The new rivers deepen while the old ones gradually dry up from disuse. Eventually, authenticity becomes your default current. Not something you have to consciously choose, but simply the natural direction your mind flows. This isn't surface-level behavior change. This is identity-level transformation. You're not faking realness until it sticks. You're literally becoming your real self by rebuilding the physical structure of your brain. Every moment of genuine expression is reshaping you at the cellular level, creating a version of yourself that's more aligned with who you've always been beneath the programming. Chapter 6: The Approval Trap. How to Stop Living for Everyone Else's Applause. You're addicted to other people's approval, and like any addiction, it's quietly destroying the most authentic parts of you. Every time you refresh a screen hoping for validation, every time you swallow your real opinion because you're afraid of the reaction, every time you make a choice based on how it will appear to someone else rather than how it actually feels to you, you're feeding a dependency that keeps you chained to a life built around other people's expectations. Breaking free from this addiction is non-negotiable if you want to find your way back to yourself. But just like any withdrawal, it's going to get uncomfortable before it gets better. This addiction didn't start yesterday. It started before you could even spell your own name. As a child, you figured out very quickly that love, warmth, and safety came through making other people happy. Certain behaviors brought you smiles, praise, attention. Other behaviors brought you coldness, disappointment, silence. Your developing brain read this as a survival equation. Approval equals safety. Disapproval equals danger. And from that point on, your nervous system was wired to chase the hit of acceptance the same way it would chase food, warmth, or shelter. This created a neurological reward system where external approval triggers genuine dopamine, the same chemical released by any addictive substance. Your brain learned to crave the rush of being liked, to feel anxious the moment that approval was threatened, and to constantly scan every interaction for signals about whether you were accepted or rejected. Over time, you developed what researchers call an external locus of control. Your entire sense of worth became tethered to things outside of yourself. The cruelest part of this addiction is how well it disguises itself. It masquerades as kindness, as thoughtfulness, as being a good partner, a good colleague, a good person. You tell yourself you're just being considerate when you rearrange your plans around someone else's preference. You tell yourself you're being professional when you bite your tongue in meetings. You tell yourself you're being loving when you sacrifice what you need to keep someone else comfortable. But here's the raw truth underneath all of that. This isn't about caring for others. It's about controlling how others see you. It's about managing your image, protecting your reputation, making sure people think well of you. It's performance wearing the costume of generosity. The cost is staggering. When your self-worth is leased from other people's opinions, you become a puppet on strings you can't see. You lose touch with what you actually want. because all your energy goes toward figuring out what everyone else wants from you. You become exhausted from the constant calculations, the endless adjustments, the never-ending performance. And worse, this addiction makes real connection impossible. You can't truly be close to someone when you're too busy managing their perception of you. You can't be vulnerable because vulnerability might cost you their approval. You can't disagree because conflict threatens the supply. Breaking this addiction requires a fundamental realization. The approval you're desperately seeking from others can only genuinely come from yourself. No amount of external validation will ever fill the emptiness created by your own self-rejection. If you don't accept yourself, if you don't believe you're worth something on your own terms, then every hit of approval from the outside will feel good for a moment and then evaporate, because it's trying to fill a space that can only be filled from the inside. The withdrawal is real. When you stop performing for approval, when you start making choices based on your own compass instead of everyone else's expectations, your brain will sound every alarm it has. Anxiety, guilt, fear, the overwhelming conviction that you're being selfish or making a terrible mistake. This is normal. This is your nervous system panicking because the supply has been cut off. The trick is learning to see these feelings for what they actually are: withdrawal symptoms, not accurate information about reality. To break the cycle, start small. Share an opinion you know might not land well. Make a decision that puts your actual need first. Say no to something that doesn't align with what matters to you. Each time you survive the discomfort, each time you discover that disapproval doesn't actually destroy you, the addiction loosens its grip. At the same time, start building an internal approval system. After each choice, instead of asking, "How did that look?" ask, "Was that true to who I am?" Start measuring your days by integrity and alignment, instead of by how many people seemed pleased with you. The goal isn't to stop caring about people altogether. It's to develop a relationship with feedback that doesn't own you, where you can hear someone's perspective without losing yours, where you can care about how your actions affect others without making their comfort more important than your truth. And when you finally break free from this cycle, something remarkable reveals itself. The people who actually matter, the ones worth keeping in your life, prefer the real you. They always did. The connections that form when you stop managing perceptions and start simply being yourself are deeper, richer, and more nourishing than anything the performance ever produced. You discover that being loved for who you actually are is an entirely different experience than being approved of for who you were pretending to be. Chapter 7. Reclaiming what you actually hunger for. Learning to want what's truly yours. You've been chasing things you were told to want for so long that you've completely lost the ability to feel what you genuinely desire. Your wants have been filtered, edited, and rerouted through so many layers of conditioning: family expectations, cultural scripts, survival strategies, that you honestly can't tell the difference anymore between something that calls to your soul and something that was planted there by someone else's agenda. Getting back in touch with your real desires isn't a luxury. It's essential. Because your authentic wants are the compass needle that points directly toward who you actually are. Take a moment and really think about the goals sitting at the center of your life right now. How many of them are actually yours? How many came from your own genuine curiosity, your own spark, your own excitement? And how many were inherited, passed down from a parent who wanted you to have the life they never had, absorbed from a culture that measures human worth in job titles and square footage, adopted from a social circle that equates success with visibility? Most people, when they sit with this question honestly, discover something uncomfortable. They've been running someone else's race. Maybe you ended up in a career because it was respected, stable, or what your family expected, not because something inside you came alive when you thought about it. Maybe you've been climbing toward lifestyle markers, the house, the car, the milestones, not because you actually crave these things, but because they represent what winning looks like in your world. Maybe you've been collecting experiences that photograph well, rather than experiences that actually feed something deep inside you. And here's why this matters so much. When you achieve something you were programmed to want, rather than something you genuinely want, reaching the finish line feels, strangely, hollow. You arrive at the destination, and instead of the satisfaction you expected, there's just emptiness, confusion, an immediate restlessness to find the next goal. This happens because you've been feeding someone else's appetite while your own authentic hunger has been starving in the background. Your real desires were formed before anyone told you what was acceptable to want. They came from your natural curiosity, the things that fascinated you before you learned to care about being impressive. Your innate gifts, the things that felt effortless before someone told you they weren't practical. Your unique way of seeing the world, the perspective that felt natural before you learned it was supposed to match everyone else's. But as you grew, you discovered that certain wants were celebrated while others were dismissed, mocked, or punished. You learned to bury the desires that seemed unrealistic, impractical, too big, too strange, or too selfish. Over time, developed a kind of numbness around your own wanting. You convinced yourself that what you truly desired didn't matter, that it was childish to believe you could have what actually called to you, that the responsible thing was to want what was available rather than what set your blood on fire. You learned to settle, to be practical instead of passionate, to be grateful instead of hungry. This suppression doesn't just affect your goals, it drains the color from your entire life. When you're cut off from what you really want, you lose access to your own fuel. Motivation becomes something you have to manufacture through discipline and willpower, instead of something that pulls you forward naturally. Life starts to feel like pushing a boulder uphill rather than being carried by a current. Reclaiming your authentic desires requires the same kind of careful excavation as finding your authentic self. You need to dig beneath the layers of borrowed ambition to discover what still genuinely sparks something in you. This often means reconnecting with interests you abandoned because they seemed immature or impractical. It means paying attention to what you're drawn to when nobody's watching and you're not trying to be impressive. Start noticing what you're naturally curious about. What do you find yourself reading about when there's no assignment? What activities swallow time whole, where you look up and hours have passed? What conversations leave you buzzing with energy afterward? What problems in the world make you feel something real in your chest? These are breadcrumbs. Follow them. Also, pay attention to what triggers judgment or envy in you when you see it in others. Often, the things we criticize people for, being too bold, too creative, too unconventional, too free, are actually mirrors of desires we've forbidden ourselves to have. If watching someone live a certain way makes your stomach tighten, ask yourself if there's a version of that want living inside you that you've been told isn't allowed. Your body is also a remarkably honest guide here. Notice what makes you feel physically expanded. Chest open, breath deep, energy rising, versus what makes you feel contracted, heavy, and drained. Your body hasn't learned to deceive itself the way your thinking mind has. It still responds honestly to what's true for you, even when your head is running calculations about what's acceptable. Reconnecting with authentic desire can be frightening because it often reveals that you want things that feel impossible or incompatible with the life you've built. You might discover that you want to walk away from a career you've invested years in, that you want to live somewhere completely different, that you want to end relationships that are comfortable but slowly suffocating you, that you want to chase something that feels too late or too enormous. But here's what I need you to understand. You don't have to act on every desire the moment you feel it. The goal isn't to detonate your entire life overnight. The goal is to stop fighting with yourself about what you want, to simply acknowledge your real hunger without immediately shutting it down. Sometimes honoring a desire means taking bold action. Sometimes it means finding small ways to weave it into your current reality. Sometimes it just means saying to yourself quietly, "I want this," and that's allowed. When you begin honoring what you actually want, even in the smallest ways, something shifts in your relationship with yourself. Trust starts to rebuild. Aliveness starts to return. You stop feeling like a passenger in someone else's story and start feeling like you're finally living your own. Chapter 8. Choosing from your center. Making decisions that actually belong to you. Every choice you make is either a step toward who you really are or a step away. And most people, without realizing it, have been stepping away for years. They make decisions from their conditioning, choosing what feels safe, what looks acceptable, what avoids conflict, rather than what feels genuinely true. Learning to make choices from your authentic center is one of the most powerful things you can do to take your life back. Your current decision-making process is probably running on software you didn't write. You make choices based on what will earn approval, what will dodge criticism, what will maintain your image, what will keep you safely invisible. You've built decision-making habits that consistently prioritize external factors over your own internal knowing. You take the job that looks right on paper, rather than the one that lights something up inside you. You stay in relationships that feel predictable, rather than ones that challenge you to grow. You choose the path that protects the status quo, rather than the path that honors the person you're becoming. This conditioning-based approach to decisions keeps you locked in patterns that haven't served you in a long time. You end up building a life that impresses people from the outside while slowly hollowing you out from the inside. Choice by choice, you drift further from who you actually are. Making authentic decisions starts with developing something called interoceptive awareness, the ability to tune in to what's happening inside your own body and use that information as guidance. Your body carries wisdom that your analytical mind hasn't caught up to yet. That tightening in your gut, the way your shoulders drop when something feels right, the difference between a breath that deepens and a breath that goes shallow. These are signals from a part of you that still knows the truth, even when your mind is running everyone else's calculations. The next time you face a choice, instead of immediately diving into pros and cons and analysis, try something different. Pause. Breathe. Imagine yourself choosing option 1, and simply notice what your body does. Do you feel lighter or heavier? More open or more closed? Then imagine choosing option 2 and notice the difference. Your body frequently knows which direction is more aligned with who you really are before your mind has finished debating the variables. This doesn't mean you should abandon rational thinking entirely, but it means your physical wisdom deserves a seat at the table alongside your logic. Authentic decision-making also requires getting clear on your actual values, not the values you think you're supposed to hold, but the ones that genuinely drive your sense of meaning. Most people, when they examine their choices closely, discover they've been operating from values they inherited rather than values they chose. Take time to identify what principles you actually want your life organized around. What qualities matter to you at your core? What impact do you want your existence to have? When you're genuinely clear on your authentic values, decisions become simpler because you have an internal measuring stick that belongs to you. Another essential piece is learning to tolerate not knowing. Conditioned decisions feel comfortable because they follow well-worn paths. But authentic decisions frequently ask you to step into territory you've never walked before. Your protective self will push hard for the predictable option, the controllable option, the one most likely to produce a result you've seen before. But growth lives in uncertainty. Authenticity lives in risk. The choices that most align with your true self are often the ones that scare you the most, because they require you to trust yourself in ways you never have before. One of the biggest things that paralyzes authentic decision-making is the belief that there's one perfect answer. Your conditioning taught you that every situation has a right choice and a wrong choice. And if you pick wrong, everything falls apart. This creates decision paralysis. You spend so much energy agonizing over the correct move that you end up making no move at all. But authentic choosing isn't about perfection. It's about honoring who you are right now while staying open to growth. You can make a choice that feels true today and make a different choice that feels true next year as you continue to evolve. The point is to choose from your current level of self-awareness rather than from your fear of future regret. When you start making decisions from your authentic center, your life begins to feel like it actually belongs to you. You stop living a script and start writing your own narrative. You develop trust in your own wisdom. Your choices become expressions of who you are rather than strategies for managing how others see you. And over time, this shift creates a ripple effect through everything. When you consistently choose from your real self, you naturally begin attracting experiences, people, and opportunities that match your truth. Your outer world starts to reflect your inner reality because you're no longer making choices that pull you away from who you actually are. Chapter 9. Relationships Built on Truth. Connecting without the costume. Your relationships are the most honest mirrors you'll ever find. They show you exactly how much of yourself you're willing to reveal and how much you're still hiding behind performance. The hard truth is that most of your current relationships were probably built while you were operating from your false self, which means they're built on a stage, not on solid ground. Learning to create connections rooted in truth instead of performance requires something most people find terrifying: showing up as who you actually are instead of who you think people need you to be. The relationships in your life right now generally fall into 3 groups. First, there are the rare ones where you feel genuinely safe, where you can be messy, honest, imperfect, and vulnerable without fear that the other person will leave or punish you. In these connections, you don't have to calculate your words or rehearse your responses. You can disagree without threatening the bond. You can grow and change without losing love. Most people have very few of these relationships, and the reason is simple. Authentic connection requires mutual openness, and openness feels dangerous when you are not convinced you're worthy of being seen as you are. If somewhere deep down you don't believe you're lovable without the performance, you'll keep attracting people who confirm that belief by requiring you to be different than you are in order to earn their affection. The second group, and this is probably where most of your relationships live, is connections that run on performance. These are the relationships where you've memorized the script. You know which topics are off limits, which parts of yourself to keep hidden, which version of you each person expects to see. These relationships might feel safe in the way that anything predictable feels safe, but they're also quietly exhausting because they require constant surveillance and adjustment. And in these relationships, you're not actually known because you're not actually showing yourself. The other person loves the character, not the human underneath. And this creates a profound kind of loneliness because even when you're surrounded by people, you're still fundamentally alone with who you really are. The third group holds the most potential. Relationships that could become authentic if you're willing to take the risk of showing up differently. These are often the long-standing connections, family, old friends, colleagues, where the patterns were set years ago when you were less awake to who you really are. The dynamic might be built on outdated versions of both of you, but there's room for evolution if both people are willing. Building authentic relationships requires what psychologists call differentiation. The capacity to stay connected to someone while also staying connected to yourself. This means you can care about another person deeply without taking on their emotions as your own burden. You can love someone without sacrificing your truth to keep them comfortable. You can remain close without disappearing into the closeness. Most people struggle with this because they've confused love with losing themselves. They think connection means agreement. Caring means never disappointing. Closeness means never having friction. But real love, the kind that actually nourishes you, requires the courage to remain yourself, even when that's inconvenient for someone else. The process of building genuine connections often starts with what feels like loss. When you stop performing, when you start being honest about who you are, some people won't welcome the change. Some relationships will fall away. Some people will tell you you've changed, and they won't mean it as a compliment. This is painful, but it's also necessary, because a relationship that requires you to betray yourself to maintain it was never a real connection in the first place. You have to be willing to lose bonds built on fiction to make room for bonds built on truth. This doesn't mean you should recklessly torch every relationship that has performance in it, but it does mean you stop putting other people's comfort above your own authenticity. Start small. Share something real you've been holding back. Draw a line you've been afraid to draw. Ask for something you've been too scared to ask for. Watch how people respond. Some will surprise you with their openness. Others will push back because your honesty forces them to face their own dishonesty. The people who genuinely love you will adjust to your growth, even if it's initially uncomfortable. The people who only loved your performance will try to push you back into the old role. Building new, authentic relationships means learning to connect from wholeness instead of hunger. When you're grounded in your own worth, when you're not desperate for someone to validate your existence, you can form connections based on genuine compatibility rather than loneliness, fear, or the need to be needed. You start attracting people who appreciate who you actually are rather than who you pretend to be. You develop the intuition to sense when someone wants you to play a character versus when someone is genuinely interested in meeting the real you. Authentic relationships are defined by mutual evolution. Both people support each other's growth and realness instead of trying to freeze each other in familiar roles. There's room for disagreement without disconnection, for individual change without threatening the bond, for vulnerability without punishment. You can be flawed without being abandoned. You can have needs without being labeled needy. You can express your truth without having to manage the other person's reaction to it. You can love someone without losing yourself inside that love. And you can be loved fully genuinely loved, without having to be anyone other than who you are. These relationships become anchors. They reflect your real self back to you when the noise of the world tries to convince you to be someone else. They become places of rest, spaces where you can finally put down the performance and just breathe. They become the ground where you practice being yourself until being yourself stops feeling like a risk and starts feeling like the only way you want to live. Chapter 10. Living it for real. Bringing your true self into every corner of your life. Knowing who you are and actually living as who you are two very different things. This is where most people get stuck. They do the inner work. They have the breakthroughs. They feel those electric moments of clarity where everything clicks and they finally see themselves clearly. But then Monday morning arrives and they walk right back into the same environments, the same routines, the same dynamics, and the performance starts up again like a machine that never lost power. They end up living a split life, real in some moments, performing in others. And that gap between their inner truth and outer reality becomes its own quiet kind of suffering. True authenticity requires what psychologists call congruence, the alignment between what's true inside you and what you express outside of you. This doesn't mean you have to be identical in every situation. Different contexts naturally call for different aspects of who you are. But it does mean that none of those expressions should require you to betray your core, swallow your real nature, or pretend to be someone you're not, just to keep things comfortable for everyone else. Work is usually the hardest arena. Most professional environments were built to reward sameness and punish anything that disrupts the machinery. You've probably spent years wearing a professional costume, speaking in a certain tone, hiding your personality behind carefully chosen words, performing competence while suppressing everything that makes you actually interesting as a human being. And every single day you spend pretending to be someone else at work is a day you spend leaking life force. The exhaustion of constant performance, the frustration of hiding your real ideas and instincts, the slow erosion of feeling like your work has nothing to do with who you actually are. All of it accumulates into a kind of burnout that no vacation can fix, because it's not about being tired, it's about being disconnected. Bringing authenticity into your work might require uncomfortable moves. Maybe it means finding a different role that actually fits who you are. Maybe it means building something of your own. Maybe it means speaking up more honestly in the spaces you already occupy. Maybe it means drawing boundaries that protect the real you from being consumed by the professional character. This doesn't mean being reckless or inappropriate. Professional authenticity means being genuinely yourself within reasonable boundaries, contributing your actual perspective, bringing your natural strengths to the table, and refusing to hide behind a persona that has nothing to do with the person wearing it. Your living space matters more than you think. The physical environment you inhabit either reflects who you are or who you're pretending to be. A lot of people live in spaces designed to impress rather than to nourish. Furniture that looks beautiful but feels uncomfortable. Decorations chosen for their aesthetic rather than their meaning. possessions that signal status but carry no personal significance whatsoever. Creating an authentic living environment means surrounding yourself with things that genuinely bring you comfort, energy, and inspiration, not things that exist to manage someone else's impression of your life. Your daily rhythms are another place where authenticity either lives or dies. Most people structure their days around what productive people are supposed to do rather than what actually works for their own unique wiring. They force themselves into morning routines that fight against their natural energy. They adopt productivity systems designed for someone else's brain. They exercise in ways that feel punishing rather than enjoyable. Authentic daily living means designing your time around your actual rhythms, your real energy patterns, your genuine preferences, even when those don't match what the self-improvement industry says you should be doing. Your relationship with money is also an expression of either your real self or your performed self. When you spend money chasing an image that doesn't reflect your genuine values, you're literally paying to maintain a lie. When you go into debt to keep up an appearance that has nothing to do with who you actually are, you're financing your own suppression. Authentic financial living means spending in alignment with what truly matters to you. Investing in experiences, things, and causes that actually feed your soul, rather than things that look impressive to people whose opinions you shouldn't be renting space to in the first place. Perhaps the most important piece of living authentically in your day-to-day is learning to pause before you react. Every moment of your day offers a fork in the road. You can choose performance, or you can choose truth. You can choose safety, or you can choose growth. Instead of running on autopilot, responding from decades-old conditioning without even noticing, you learn to take a breath and check in with yourself. What would be most honest for me right now? What choice would I make if I wasn't worried about how it looks? How can I honor who I really am in this specific moment? The goal isn't to be flawlessly authentic every second of every day. That's not realistic. And chasing perfection is just another form of performance. The goal is conscious choice. The goal is gradually increasing the percentage of your life that feels aligned with who you actually are. Building momentum so that being yourself becomes the easier option. So that pretending starts to feel heavier and more unnatural than just being real. When you successfully weave authenticity into every area of your life, something profound shifts. The feeling of living multiple lives dissolves. That exhausting sense of wearing different masks for different people starts to fade. You develop a feeling of wholeness, of being the same person regardless of where you are or who you're with. Your life starts to feel like it actually belongs to you, because for the first time, it truly does. Your struggles become real struggles instead of manufactured ones. Your joys become real joys instead of performed ones. You stop waiting for someone to give you permission to exist and start granting that permission to yourself every single day. Chapter 11. When the world pushes back. navigating the resistance that comes with being real. The moment you start living as who you actually are, the world will test your commitment. People who are comfortable with your performance will resist your evolution. Systems that benefited from your compliance will push back against your independence. And your own mind, still running old survival software, will flood you with fear and doubt, trying to drag you back to the familiar. This resistance is not evidence that you're on the wrong path. It's evidence that you're on a path that actually matters. Understanding how to move through this resistance is critical, because most people abandon their authenticity the first time it gets difficult. Resistance wears many disguises, and learning to recognize them will save you from being pulled back into old patterns when you're most vulnerable. The first form is social resistance, the pushback from people around you. Family members who assigned you a role in their system will pressure you to step back into that role. Friends who were comfortable with you as the agreeable one, the easygoing one, the one who never made waves, will express confusion or disappointment when you start drawing lines. Colleagues who benefited from your tendency to overwork and overdeliver will make you feel guilty when you begin protecting your time and energy. This social resistance often arrives wearing a mask of concern. People will tell you they're worried about you. They'll say you've changed, that you're not the same person anymore, that something seems off. They'll frame your growth as a problem, calling it selfishness, irresponsibility, recklessness. What they're actually expressing, whether they know it or not, is their discomfort with watching you outgrow patterns that were convenient for them. Your authenticity holds up a mirror to their inauthenticity, and that reflection is deeply uncomfortable. The second form is systemic resistance. The structures you move through, workplaces, institutions, social circles, are designed to maintain the existing order. They reward people who stay in line and create friction for people who don't. When you start expressing your real self in professional settings, you might face subtle consequences, being passed over, being labeled as difficult, being gradually excluded. When you start making choices rooted in your values instead of social expectations, you might find certain doors closing, certain invitations disappearing. The third form, and often the most difficult, is internal resistance. Your own mind, still running programs written decades ago, will create obstacles from the inside. You'll feel anxiety when you express something honest, guilt when you hold a boundary, fear when you pursue something that genuinely excites you. Your inner critic will get louder, not quieter. It will warn you that you're being unrealistic, that you're going to lose everything, that you should stop while you still can. This internal resistance is the trickiest because it disguises itself as your own wisdom. It feels like your authentic voice saying, "Stop." But it's not. It's your conditioning, terrified of change. The fear you feel about living honestly isn't based on what's happening now. It's based on what happened when you were young, and authenticity genuinely carried consequences. Understanding why people resist your growth helps you respond with clarity instead of reactivity. When someone pushes back against your authenticity, they're usually projecting their own unresolved relationship with realness onto you. They see you choosing truth over comfort, growth over safety, and it activates everything they've been avoiding about their own life. They're not really trying to help you, they're trying to manage the anxiety your changes create in them. The key to navigating social resistance is maintaining emotional differentiation. You can recognize someone's discomfort without making it your responsibility. You can care about their feelings without sacrificing your truth to manage those feelings. You can love someone deeply and still disappoint them. This isn't cold or callous. It's necessary. Because every time you abandon your authentic path to soothe someone else's discomfort, you're telling yourself that their comfort matters more than your existence. When you face systemic resistance, remember that systems push back precisely because your authenticity threatens their control. The fact that an institution or social structure resists you doesn't mean you're wrong. It means you're challenging something that benefits from keeping you small. Sometimes navigating this means finding new systems that align with your values. Sometimes it means building something entirely new. Internal resistance requires a different approach. The skill you need here is learning to tell the difference between genuine intuition and conditioned fear. Authentic intuition feels expansive, even when it's scary. It pulls you toward something, even as your hands shake. Conditioned fear feels contractive. It shoves you back toward the familiar, toward smallness, toward the known. When internal resistance rises, ask yourself, is this protecting me from real danger, or is this protecting me from growth? Real danger requires caution. Growth-related fear requires courage. One of the most effective ways to build resilience against resistance is what researchers call stress inoculation, gradually exposing yourself to increasing levels of challenge. Start by being authentic in low-stakes environments. Build your tolerance for discomfort. Then, progressively bring your truth into more challenging contexts. Each time you survive, you get stronger. Also, document your progress. When resistance feels overwhelming, it's easy to forget how far you've already come. Keep a record of the moments you chose truth over performance, the boundaries you held, the honest conversations you had despite the fear. This becomes a reservoir of evidence you can draw from when doubt starts creeping back in. And remember this, resistance often intensifies right before a breakthrough. There's a phenomenon psychologists call an extinction burst. Old patterns fight hardest just before they finally lose their grip. When the pressure feels most intense, it often means you're on the edge of a real shift. The storm gets loudest just before it breaks. Chapter 12. The Mastery Framework. Creating permanent alignment between who you are and how you live. Mastery isn't about reaching a point where you never struggle again. It's about building such deep alignment between your inner truth and your outer life that being real becomes your default, not something you have to consciously fight for every morning. Most people treat authenticity like something they practice on weekends. Real masters of authentic living have built systems, environments, and internal structures that make inauthenticity harder and more exhausting than simply being who they are. The foundation of this mastery is what psychologists call integrated identity. Instead of running multiple versions of yourself for different audiences, you develop one coherent self that expresses naturally across different contexts. You're not identical in every room, but every version of you flows from the same authentic source. Nothing you express requires you to betray your center. Building this requires self-knowledge that goes far deeper than surface-level personality labels. You need to know your core values so clearly that you can feel when a situation is pulling you away from them. You need to know your authentic desires so intimately that you can recognize a conditioned want the moment it shows up, pretending to be yours. You need to understand your natural rhythms and energy patterns so well that you can design a life that works with your wiring instead of against it. The second pillar is emotional sovereignty, the ability to feel your emotions completely without being ruled by them. Most people either shut their emotions down to avoid discomfort or get swept away by them and make reactive choices they later regret. Mastery means experiencing your feelings as valuable information rather than commands, using them as signals about your needs and boundaries while making choices from your grounded, conscious center. The third pillar is relational authenticity, remaining fully yourself while staying deeply connected to others. This requires what psychologists call assertive communication, expressing your truth clearly and directly while remaining respectful. Not aggressive, which dominates, not passive, which hides, assertive, which honors both your truth and the other person's dignity simultaneously. The fourth pillar is what I'd call deliberate life design, intentionally structuring your environment, your schedule, your relationships, and your financial life so that authentic choices become the path of least resistance. This might mean reshaping your physical space to reflect your real tastes, restructuring your time to honor your natural energy, adjusting your social world to include more people who welcome realness and fewer who reward performance, changing your financial structure so you're not trapped in income sources that demand you be someone you're not. The fifth pillar is adaptive resilience, the ability to stay authentic even when life gets chaotic. Stress, uncertainty, setbacks. Life will always throw turbulence your way. Mastery means developing the capacity to navigate storms without abandoning your truth or reverting to old survival strategies. The sixth pillar is continuous evolution. Understanding that your authentic self isn't a fixed destination. It keeps growing, changing, deepening. What felt true at 25 may not feel true at 40. Mastery means staying open to your own evolution, rather than clinging to an outdated version of yourself. The seventh pillar is authentic contribution, giving to the world from your genuine gifts and passions rather than from obligation, guilt, or the need to prove your worth. Your most meaningful impact will always come from the place where your natural talents and genuine care intersect. When these pillars work together, something extraordinary happens. You stop having to choose between being real and being accepted, because you've built a life where those two things aren't in conflict anymore. You've found people who see the real you and choose to stay. You've created work that draws from your genuine strengths. You've designed an environment that supports your truth. And you've developed enough internal stability to stay centered no matter what happens around you. This isn't about never struggling. Masters still face hard days, still feel the pull of old patterns, still encounter situations that test their commitment. The difference is they have a foundation strong enough to hold them. They've made being real so deeply integrated into who they are and how they live that pretending requires more effort than honesty. And that shift from effortful authenticity to effortful performance is the true mark of mastery. Chapter 13. The Deeper Waters. Navigating the complex challenges that come with truly living as yourself. Once you've built a solid foundation of authentic living, you'll start encountering a different kind of challenge, one that most people never reach because they never got past the basics. These aren't the challenges of fear or hiding. These are the challenges of complexity. They arise not because you're afraid to be real, but because being real in a world still largely organized around performance creates sophisticated dilemmas that don't have clean, simple answers. One of the most significant of these is what researchers call the authenticity paradox, the discovery that your real self contains contradictions. You might be simultaneously driven and deeply peaceful, social and deeply solitary, fiercely independent and hungry for connection, logical and wildly intuitive. Most people, when they encounter these internal contradictions, try to resolve them by picking one side and burying the other. But that's just another form of suppression. Real mastery means learning to hold paradox, to let both truths exist inside you without needing to collapse them into one tidy narrative. This paradox becomes especially tricky when different authentic parts of you pull in opposite directions. Maybe your genuine desire to create art conflicts with your equally genuine need for financial stability. Maybe your honest value of kindness bumps against your honest value of truth when telling someone the reality might wound them. Maybe your authentic craving for solitude clashes with your authentic longing for deep intimacy. These aren't signs that something is wrong with you. They're signs that you're a complex human being, and complexity doesn't resolve into bumper sticker wisdom. Navigating these contradictions requires dialectical thinking, the ability to hold multiple truths at the same time without forcing them into a single answer. Instead of treating internal tension as a problem to fix, you learn to see it as the natural texture of a fully lived life. You develop the capacity to honor different parts of yourself in different moments, while maintaining your overall sense of integrity. You stop trying to be one simple, consistent character and start allowing yourself to be a living, breathing, evolving human being with depth and range. Another advanced challenge is authentic expression within power dynamics. When you hold authority or influence, as a leader, a parent, a mentor, a public figure, your authenticity carries more weight. An unfiltered moment of honesty from a position of power can land very differently than the same honesty from a peer. Leaders who are authentic without wisdom can create chaos. Parents who express every raw feeling without filter can overwhelm their children. Authenticity without awareness becomes a wrecking ball disguised as honesty. This requires developing contextual sensitivity, the wisdom to express your real self in ways that serve the moment and the people in it, without betraying your core truth. This isn't performance. It's mature authenticity. It's understanding that being real doesn't mean being reckless, and that wisdom and authenticity aren't enemies, they're partners. A particularly nuanced challenge emerges in intimate relationships when you're committed to living authentically, but your partner, your family members, or your closest friends are still deeply embedded in their own performance. You can't force anyone else to be real. And demanding authenticity from others as a condition for your own is just another form of control. What you can do is practice what relationship therapists call differentiated intimacy, staying close to someone while maintaining your own separate truth. Loving people exactly where they are without requiring them to match your level of self-awareness before you're willing to be genuine with them. Being vulnerable and open without keeping score of whether they reciprocate equally. This is harder than it sounds. When you've done significant inner work and the people closest to you haven't, it's easy to slip into subtle judgment, to feel like you've outgrown them, to become quietly superior about your own growth. But that superiority is just another mask. Real authenticity includes humility. It includes the recognition that everyone is on their own timeline, fighting battles you may know nothing about, and that your path isn't the only valid one. The challenge of authentic creativity presents another frontier that most people don't consider. If you have any creative impulse, and most people do, whether they recognize it or not, you'll eventually face the tension between creating what you genuinely want to express and creating what you think the world wants to consume. The market has opinions. Algorithms have preferences. Audiences have expectations. And it's remarkably easy to let all of that noise drown out the quiet voice inside you that knows what actually wants to come through. Authentic creativity requires developing trust in your own creative instincts, even when they don't make logical sense, and especially when they don't seem commercially viable. It means learning to distinguish between creating from genuine inspiration, that deep urge to express something true, and creating from ego, which is really just the need for approval wearing an artistic costume. The most powerful creative work always comes from the place where you stopped trying to be impressive and started trying to be honest. Advanced authentic living also means navigating moral complexity, situations where your values conflict with each other, where there's no clean right answer, where every option carries some cost. These are the moments that test the depth of your integrity. Not the easy choices where doing the right thing is obvious, but the hard ones where you have to weigh competing truths and make peace with imperfection. Developing moral sophistication means moving beyond rule following into principled discernment, making difficult choices that honor your deepest values while accepting that some situations don't have perfect solutions. Maintaining authenticity during major life transitions presents yet another layer of complexity. When your life is in flux, between careers, between relationships, between versions of yourself, it can be genuinely hard to know what an authentic choice even looks like. Your identity might be shifting faster than your ability to understand it. In these seasons, the skill you need most is tolerance for ambiguity, the ability to stay rooted in your core even when the specifics are blurry. To make the most honest choice available to you right now, while staying open to the possibility that tomorrow's honest choice might look completely different. And there's the challenge of authentic aging, a frontier almost nobody talks about. Your real self isn't frozen in time. What lit you up at 25 might bore you at 45. The priorities that defined your 30s might feel irrelevant in your 50s. Advanced authenticity means remaining open to your own evolution across an entire lifetime, rather than clinging to an identity that fit a version of you that no longer exists. It means having the courage to let go of who you were in order to become who you're becoming, again and again, for as long as you're alive. Perhaps the most advanced territory of all is what could be called authentic transcendence, the integration of your personal truth with something larger than yourself. This might express itself through spiritual practice, creative devotion, service to a cause you believe in, or simply the quiet recognition that your individual life is part of a much larger story. The challenge here is maintaining your genuine individuality while participating in something that goes beyond your personal boundaries. It's the recognition that who you really are includes not just your individual nature, but your connection to other people, to the natural world, to whatever you understand as sacred. These advanced challenges don't have finish lines. They're ongoing territories for growth and deepening, not problems to solve and forget, but landscapes to explore for the rest of your life. And the willingness to keep exploring, even when the terrain gets complicated, is what separates people who dabble in authenticity from people who truly live it. Chapter 14. The Ripple You Leave Behind. How being yourself changes more than just your life. Your authenticity isn't only about you. That might sound strange because everything we've explored has been deeply personal. Your conditioning, your wounds, your choices, your growth. But the truth is that every time you choose honesty over performance, every time you pick courage over comfort, every time you refuse to shrink yourself to fit someone else's expectations, you're doing something that extends far beyond your own life. You're creating permission. And that permission spreads in ways you may never fully see. Most people underestimate the influence of their authenticity because they only measure the immediate, visible reactions. You share a real opinion and someone pushes back. You draw a boundary and someone gets upset. You chase a genuine dream and face criticism. The short-term feedback can make being real feel costly and pointless. But the actual impact of authenticity operates on much longer timelines and through much subtler channels than most people realize. Your authenticity creates what systems thinkers call nonlinear effects. Small, consistent choices that compound over time into massive shifts. When you stop performing, the people closest to you don't just notice. Something inside them starts to stir. Some of them begin, maybe for the first time, questioning their own performance. When you speak a truth that nobody else in the room would say, you don't just make one point, you crack open a door that other people have been too afraid to push. The ripple doesn't stop with the first wave. This operates through what researchers call social contagion, the unconscious transmission of emotional states and behaviors through networks of people. When you carry yourself with authentic confidence, with genuine vulnerability, with real courage, the people around you begin to resonate with those qualities, even if nobody says a word about it. This is why certain people make you feel more comfortable being yourself just by being in the same room. Their authentic presence creates an invisible field of permission, a signal that says, "It's safe to be real here." One of the most powerful ways your authenticity creates lasting impact is by quietly redefining what success looks like in your corner of the world. When you choose fulfillment over achievement, when you choose alignment over applause, when you choose depth over image, you're demonstrating that there are other ways to measure a life worth living. And this demonstration is especially powerful for the people watching you most closely. Children who grow up around adults who are real learn something most children never learn: that love doesn't require performance, that feelings are allowed, that disagreement doesn't mean disconnection, that you can be imperfect and still be worthy. Partners of authentic people often find themselves becoming more honest, more open, more willing to show the parts of themselves they've been hiding. Colleagues of authentic people frequently report feeling braver in meetings, more willing to speak up, more comfortable pushing back on things that don't feel right. Your authentic living also feeds what sociologists call cultural evolution, the gradual shift in collective values and norms that happens when enough individuals start living differently. Every person who chooses truth over conformity slightly increases the odds that others will make the same choice. This is how every meaningful cultural transformation in human history has actually happened. Not through grand declarations from above, but through the quiet accumulation of individual decisions to live more honestly. Every movement that expanded human freedom began with people who refused to perform a role that contradicted who they really were. Your contribution to this collective evolution doesn't require fame, a platform, or a following. It just requires you to be consistently, courageously yourself in whatever spaces you naturally occupy. Your authenticity at work contributes to more humane professional cultures. Your authenticity in your family contributes to breaking generational patterns that have been cycling for decades. Your authenticity in your friendships contributes to creating spaces where other people feel safe enough to stop pretending. This impact also works through what psychologists call modeling, the unconscious learning that happens when people observe how you handle life. When you navigate conflict honestly, when you express vulnerability without collapsing, when you hold a boundary with both firmness and compassion, you're showing other people something they may have never seen before. You're expanding their sense of what's possible in their own lives. Your authenticity also creates what could be called permission amplification. When you grant yourself permission to be real, you unconsciously extend that same permission to everyone around you. When you stop apologizing for your nature, other people feel the subtle invitation to stop apologizing for theirs. When you celebrate what makes you different instead of hiding it, inspire others to look at their own uniqueness with less shame. This often happens without a single conversation about authenticity. People just feel freer around you, and most of them never fully understand why. The legacy of this extends beyond your lifetime. The way you live becomes part of what you pass on, through your children if you have them, through the people you mentor, through the younger people who observe your life even from a distance. The patterns you embody become the patterns they consider possible for themselves. This is why choosing authenticity is ultimately an act of love for people who haven't been born yet. When you heal your own patterns instead of recycling them, when you choose growth over fear, when you choose truth over convenience, you're changing the inheritance of the next generation. And perhaps the most profound dimension of all, this chain doesn't stop. The people you influence will influence others, who will influence others, who will influence others. Your authentic living becomes a thread in a fabric much larger than your own story, a fabric of permission, courage, and possibility that stretches far beyond anything you can personally see or measure. Understanding this isn't meant to add pressure to your journey. You shouldn't live authentically for the sake of impact. Genuine authenticity has to be chosen for its own sake, because it's true, because it's right, because it's who you are. But knowing that your courage has consequences beyond your own life can offer fuel during the hard moments, when the cost of being real feels steep and the temptation to retreat into performance feels overwhelming. Your authenticity matters, not just to you, to the entire web of lives that yours touches. Chapter 15. The Path That Never Ends. Embracing the lifelong art of becoming who you are. Authenticity is not a place you arrive at. It's a way of walking through your life. There's no final summit where you plant a flag and declare yourself fully, permanently, completely authentic. Your real self keeps growing, keeps evolving, keeps revealing new layers as you encounter new experiences, develop new capabilities, and discover new depths you didn't know you had. Mastering authenticity doesn't mean finishing the work. It means falling in love with the ongoing process of staying true to who you're becoming. This understanding changes everything about how you approach the journey. Instead of trying to figure yourself out once and then lock that identity in place forever, you develop a living, breathing, dynamic relationship with your own truth. You become genuinely curious about who you're becoming rather than attached to who you've been. You learn to move with the current of your own evolution instead of trying to dam the river. This requires what researchers call psychological flexibility, the ability to adapt your expression and even your sense of self as your life changes, while keeping your core integrity intact. This is very different from the rigid consistency that many people confuse with authenticity. True authenticity includes the freedom to grow, to change your mind, to develop new passions, to release old identities that no longer fit. Who you are at 30 is not who you are at 50, and pretending otherwise is just another form of performance. Embracing this evolutionary nature means getting comfortable with identity fluidity. You might discover interests that catch you completely off guard. You might develop strengths you never imagined were in you. You might feel called to make changes that surprise the people who thought they knew you, and surprise yourself in the process. Instead of resisting these shifts or trying to stay consistent with your past self, you learn to trust the unfolding. You learn what I'd call evolutionary courage, the willingness to become who you're meant to be, even when that person is different from who you've been. One of the most important skills on this lifelong path is learning to distinguish between authentic evolution and reactive escape. Genuine growth emerges from deepening self-understanding, expanding awareness, and naturally evolving values. Reactive change is driven by the urge to flee discomfort, avoid facing something difficult, or chase novelty because the current moment feels hard. Learning to tell these apart helps you say yes to real transformation while avoiding unnecessary upheaval. As you mature in your authentic journey, you'll encounter what I'd call evolutionary transitions. Moments that require you to release an outdated version of yourself to make room for who you're becoming. A career shift that demands a new identity. A relationship change that challenges everything you assumed about yourself. A life stage that calls forward parts of you that have been dormant for years. These transitions often feel like identity crises because they require genuine letting go. The version of you that thrived in one chapter might not be the version equipped for the next. And learning to navigate these passages with grace, with patience, with trust, is one of the deepest expressions of authentic mastery. The ongoing path also involves what I'd call depth discovery, the continuing process of finding layers within yourself that you didn't know existed. Even after years of honest living, you'll keep uncovering things, new sensitivities, new capacities, new vulnerabilities you didn't realize you were carrying. These discoveries often come through experiences that stretch you beyond what's comfortable. Loss, love, failure, parenthood, aging, unexpected success, unexpected collapse. Instead of seeing these revelations as disruptions, you learn to receive them as gifts that make your understanding of yourself richer and more complete. Mastering the lifelong journey also requires what I'd call temporal wisdom, the ability to honor your past without being imprisoned by it. This means carrying the lessons and growth of everything you've lived through while refusing to be defined or limited by old versions of yourself. You learn to hold gratitude for who you've been and openness for who you're becoming in the same hand. As your relationship with authenticity deepens over time, something remarkable happens to the effort involved. In the beginning, being real feels like climbing a mountain. Every honest moment requires conscious effort, deliberate courage, active resistance against the pull of old patterns. But as you practice, as the new rivers in your brain deepen and the old ones dry up, the effort shifts. Authenticity becomes your resting state. Performance becomes the thing that requires energy. You reach a point where pretending feels foreign, uncomfortable, like wearing shoes that are 3 sizes too small. Being yourself is no longer a brave choice. It's simply the only way that feels right anymore. The most mature stages of authenticity living also involve what could be called self-transcendent authenticity. The point where your individual realness integrates with service to something larger than your own story. Your authenticity stops being primarily about personal liberation and becomes about offering your genuine gifts to the world. You realize that being fully yourself isn't selfish, it's generous. Because the world genuinely needs what only you can give, and you can only give it when you stop pretending to be someone else. This transcendent dimension includes the quiet understanding that your individual journey of becoming real is connected to a much larger collective movement toward more honest, more conscious, more compassionate ways of being human. Your commitment to your own truth becomes inseparable from your commitment to the healing of the world around you. Not in some grand, dramatic way, but in the simple, daily act of refusing to be anything other than what you are. As you continue walking this path, you develop what I'd call evolutionary faith, a deep, quiet trust that your authentic journey is unfolding exactly as it needs to. That the detours were necessary, that the pain served a purpose, that the person you're becoming is worth every moment of discomfort it took to get here. This faith doesn't mean everything feels easy or makes perfect sense. It means you've learned to trust the process of your own becoming, even when you can't see where it's leading. The mastery of continuous, authentic evolution means you never stop growing, never stop discovering, never stop being surprised by yourself. You remain curious about who you are for your entire life. Not from a place of confusion, but from a place of wonder. You understand that the project of becoming yourself is the adventure of a lifetime, and you wouldn't trade it for any amount of safety, predictability, or conventional approval. This is the ultimate freedom. To be continuously, courageously, unapologetically yourself through every season, every challenge, every unexpected turn. To stay honest with who you are while remaining wide open to who you're becoming. To live from your deepest truth while knowing that even deeper truths are waiting to be discovered. To be fully, magnificently human, with all the contradictions, the complexity, and the breathtaking possibility that comes with it. The journey doesn't end. And that's not a problem. That's the whole point. You get to spend your entire existence discovering and becoming yourself. You get to weave your unique thread into the enormous, beautiful fabric of human experience. You get to be part of creating a more honest, more courageous, more real world, simply by being who you are. The question was never whether you'd arrive at some final, perfected version of yourself. The question was always simpler than that. Will you commit to the ongoing, imperfect, beautiful practice of being more yourself, more true, more real, more honest with each day you're given? Because in the end, finding yourself was never about reaching a destination. It was about learning to walk your own path, with your own feet, at your own pace, in your own direction, and discovering that the walking itself was the whole point all along.